Is 8:40 Newstalk Sauga 960 Raw. Mike Richards. It is a Wednesday, and we are going to talk to our good friend Chris Houston, and we are going to talk about a very different kind of book. Now, of course, we've had authors from all different places, and a lot of them from the East Coast, actually, which is kind of interesting. We've had and a lot of varied subject matter. Now, the book is called Line in the Sand, so I'm thinking that when we talk about this, and I just sort of out of curiosity thought, okay, I'm going to look this up. Thao Lam is the author and a very accomplished artist herself, along with everything else, and we're going to meet her in a couple of seconds. But I thought, line in the sand is something that we use a lot. You hear it thrown around in sports. We use it quite a bit probably in search situations that don't even need it. So I thought, where does it come from? So apparently, it's accepted as a reference to the action of William B. Travis, who in 1836, while commanding the defenders of the Alamo, so it's been around a while, and contemplating a demand for surrender, drew a line in the sand and asked those willing to remain and defend the Alamo to their deaths to step across it. A lot more serious than perhaps watching the Buffalo Bills and scoring a field goal and drawing a line in the sand and daring the Steelers to score a touchdown. A little difference in circumstance. And this book is wordless. So in getting across this idea of what line in the sand, so therefore a conflict, there is a lot that goes into this. And in fact, I'm thinking about how one even conveys this message, considering the art form that it is, which is almost collage-like, I suppose. This is probably one of the more challenging things that I've looked at in terms of how one goes about coming up with this book. So we go to the critically acclaimed author, Thao Lam, and we say, good morning, how are you today?
Good morning, Mike. I'm good, thanks. And thanks for having me on. My name is actually Thao. So the
Thao, okay, silent, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, this is, now I will say this. It seems like if you go to Sheridan, that you're a genius. Everything that I've seen from anybody from Sheridan is unbelievable. Come From Away, when I went to see that play, and they said, yeah, they came up with it while they were at school at Sheridan. I'm like, it is a phenomenal program. I mean, the talent that it takes to be accepted to begin with, but then what comes out on the other side really is phenomenal. So I guess if we're talking about, before we get to this book, all these things that go into Thao, your makeup. So how do you come with this artistic angle? Because it is very different and very fascinating.
I think all the stories that I've come up with so far have been all very personal experiences or things that I've observed. Like I love people watching and trying to figure out how people behave and why they do certain things. So most of the stories that I've come up with so far have been like very personal to my own experience. I also find that like tragedies or hardships that you've gone through are great, make great stories. Even though you don't feel it in the moment, they do end up making great stories or great lessons that you can pass along or that you've learned yourself. But also, like, because of all those hardships, it's actually, working on a book is very therapeutic for me. So it helps me process like the experience I went through or something that I'm dealing with. It's meditative. So that's how I come up with most of my stories.
So it sounds like too that when you're quote unquote a new Canadian, so you come from another place where English is not your first language, must lend to the understanding of what goes on, people watching, without knowing the language, because it seems like that is the translation that you have used to get across your messages.
Yes, it's true. Like when you don't understand a language or a culture, like all you can do is interpret what you visually see, right? It's like when you're traveling, if you're in another country, you don't know what's going on. Sometimes you're asking a question and they would either draw the picture out for you or like do a mime for you. Like, so for me, when I first came to Canada, children's books were what I used to helped me learn what was going on, right? And because I didn't know how to read, I spent a lot of time just making up the stories based on the visuals that I saw. And so that's why, like, I'm very fond of wordless picture books, because it allows you to do that. It allows you to do, it allows you to pass it on to anybody, and they can tell the story themselves and experience it without having to know how to read or even know that language, right? So it's very versatile. Yeah.
Well, we're also joined by Chris Houston from the Idea Shop. Chris, always great to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much for me to be able to have even a conversation with Thao Lam. I'm a huge fan of her work. And I think one of the things that I love about children's books is I'm a big fan of them and have been, like she was, for a long time, is they really spark some great conversations with kids. All of the therapists, all of the psychologists, when you're bringing up kids, they always say, as long as you can keep them talking, if you can keep your kids talking and sharing and telling you things, everything's going to be okay. And what I love about The Line in the Sand is, as my son says, there's not a lot of words in this book, none, but there's a lot to talk about in this book. You know, two monsters in a playground. There's a bit of a showdown, and there's a line in the sand. I think you can see the Alamo or imagine it off in the distance there for sure. And this conflict resolution is happening without words in a playground, and it makes everything very much, you know, that expression, level playing field. Thao, maybe just tell us a little bit what inspired this particular story to come about with you and your daughter.
Well, we live in a building, so we don't really have a backyard or a front yard. And so we spend a lot of time at the park. And well, as you know, at the park, there's a lot of different things going on at the same time, right? And this is a perfect place to be people watching, and especially little ones, because little ones are very honest. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack at the playground. So it was an afternoon where we were at the park and we watched two kids have a confrontation. I don't really remember what the confrontation was about or even know the details of it. But at the end of it, my daughter, Maddie, she was asking me who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And it was then where I try to explain to her that, you know, sometimes there isn't a good guy or a bad guy. It's just different perspectives and or a lack of communication, like they weren't clear enough, and so a huge misunderstanding would erupt. So that is basically how the story started, and I was really fascinated by this idea of us, what we do say or what we don't say and how it's interpreted. Yeah, that's how The Line of Sand started.
Well, it is a fascinating process, I think, and we shouldn't also just sort of sift over what it takes to actually visually put this together in terms of, like, people are listening right now and they're thinking, okay, so you drew a lot of pictures. No, it's not drawing necessarily. Well, how would you describe what the art is in this book?
Well, for me, it's visual storytelling. It's very much like if you're watching a silent movie, or if you are, even right now, there is a lot of shows that are available from other countries and there's subtitles running underneath of it, right? And sometimes that's how I picture a wordless picture book, is a silent movie that's like running through my head, and like which actions or which perspective of the scene will help tell the story or move it along. And so that's how I would describe it. And it is a lot of visuals, but it's also, you have to be very careful in which choices you make, because it is up for interpretation, and there could be ways in which it can be misunderstood. And so my editor and I would go through it with like a fine-tooth comb and try it out on different people and different readers and see, like, how are they interpreting it? Okay, is this story working the way I intended it to?
And this is a day and age now where there are enormous sensitivities.
Yes.
So if you have drawn something or created something artistically that could be misinterpreted. I couldn't imagine the hot water towel that you would be in. It would be relentless.
Yeah, that's kind of one of my worst fears, is to get a hate mail. um, or a bad review. That's another one. But yeah, it's for this one, it was something so simple that we observed in an afternoon at the playground, kind of took a life of its own. And it's probably one of my books that I've worked the hardest on, because there was many ways in which people could read into this, right? And like, we had to deal with we really had to strip it down and try different methods of, because originally I pictured like kids in the playground, right? And then we got onto the topic of, well, there could be a misunderstanding. We could be talking about an ethnicity or a gender, or we could be pitting certain economic status against each other. So there's lots of ways. And so we started stripping it back. And I go, well, what if we did it abstract? What if it was shapes, like triangles versus circles? And then it was just like, well, people who love triangles and circles are going to write to you and complain, right? So it was just so many different ways that this could go wrong. And I think at the end we decided monsters, but monsters with a lot of different appearance, so that you could not, they were neutral. Like, you couldn't pin a gender to it, you couldn't pin a race to it, you couldn't pin a political party to it.
Right.
And so it was a hard one to try to figure out without.
Because right now, with the horrible situation between Russia and Ukraine,
Yes.
it wouldn't take much
Yes.
to have one was red and the other's like yellow and blue. I mean, you do something like that, all of a sudden, you're not necessarily in hot water, but you're making a statement. And so, Chris, I'm just curious, because you have, well, the reason it's called the Idea Shop, a lot of great ideas and a lot of different ideas. You're not only attraction to this book, this process, but those that would buy it, those, who's consuming this kind of thing, because we assume it's a children's book, which we talk about it, but it's a very adult theme. And so I'm just, those that would buy it, who are we talking about here? Are we talking about schools? Is it something that you can convey in a classroom? Is it something that a parent is having with a child at night as they're, a lot of times, story reading? What was your take on something like that?
Well, when my grade 5 kid comes home from school or the park or the sandbox and mentions Ukraine, or he's heard something, or there's news. I mean, obviously, we're not really trying. It's hard to shield anyone these days from anything. That's a difficult conversation. Mike and I talking about the Ukraine-Russia thing would be a wild and explosive conversation for sure, even if we're on the same sides of things. It's difficult to explain things to kids. Tao's book comes along, and I have a tool that is a fun thing. It lives in my kid's room. It's not the television, it's not the internet. And it's this great tool for talking about these things, Often, Mike and Chris wouldn't be Mike and Chris unless we knew what we thought was right and wrong. But not everybody shares your points of view. I'm a big fan of circles. I know my son likes triangles. We could be in a whole lot of hot water. But here comes this book. And it wouldn't surprise me. This book is university teachable, and it's gorgeous. Tao's ability to collage different colors of paper and stuff has made these, she's absolutely right. There's no hate mail coming for this. Every shape, color, size, it's all in the book. So I think it's the kind of book, that's what I loved about it, and thought it was great for your show and your audience, Mike, because I thought this is a good book for pretty much anyone who has eyes, hands, and is in favor of a good conversation.
So Tao, as the artist, as the author, are you happy with how it turned out? Do you think it worked the way you wanted it to?
Yes, I do. I think story-wise, it was exactly what I was picturing, because I know the process and the many drafts that my editor and I went through to get it where it is. So it is exactly how. I wouldn't say that's how I pictured it, because when I started it, that was not the end. I couldn't see the end point because all I saw were all these issues that were coming at me and how I would resolve it. But I'm very glad that, you know, us chipping away at it finally gave me something that I was like, okay, this is a good way to present this idea of like lack of communication or misunderstanding. And visually, like it was fun because I always like a challenge with each book, because sometimes you know, you do one book after another and you get into this like hamster wheel. And so it's fun to do, or add a little, for me, add a little challenge to it so that, you know, it keeps me on my toes. So this book was done digitally. Usually I am like a very hands-on collage pieces, but this was my first digital attempt into the book world. And so I had a huge learning curve and how to use a computer, how to turn it on. But it was great. I enjoy it, and I hope like the audience and readers of all ages enjoy it and sort of come away with something that they can talk about.
Well, it certainly will be of discussion. The book is called The Line in the Sand. That is Thao Lam. The book is available via Owl Kids Books. They're saying ages 4 and up, but as I said, it's a discussion that you literally could drop in a university sociology or history class, and they would decipher this thing in many, many different ways. This is a very, maybe the most interesting and different book that we've ever talked about on this show, certainly. And I'm sure it came with its challenges, but beautifully done. And I thank you so much, Thao, for joining us here this morning. That's absolutely brilliant.
Well, thank you.
And Chris Houston, anytime, buddy. Love to see you.
Thanks, Mike. Great times. Love the book. Thank you, Thao.
Chris Houston from The Ideas Shop. And that's how we wrap up this morning's show. We are going to